The biggest issue for this claim, for my money, is that the claim of perfect preservation did not even make it to its 100-year-old birthday. If you had asked a Muslim in 1923 if the Quran had been perfectly preserved, they would have looked at you like they were a flying donkey monster named Burak. The reason I chose 1923 is because in 1924, the king of Egypt, King Fuad, ordered a standardized version to be printed to simplify the Quran and better aid Dawah, the Muslim word for evangelism. And for all intents and purposes, it worked, just not in the way that was expected. Dawah took the new standardized Quran and ran with it. They preached to ignorant crowds about the Quran being perfectly uniform and preserved down to the letter, and the Cairo edition became the most widespread translation. For reference, it uses the Hafs Qira'at. By mass-producing and distributing these specific Qurans, Muslims were able to perpetuate the lie that this was the only Quran and it was perfectly preserved from the moment of its creation. But that all changed thanks to a fiery, little ex-Muslim woman from Turkey who brought down one of the 3 biggest claims of the world's second largest religion. On August 6th of 2016, Dawah was running strong with its claim of being perfectly preserved. Speaker's Corner is a place in Britain where Muslims would often go to do Dawah and were usually very successful. That was brought to a screeching halt when ex-Muslim and now Christian apologist and polemicist Hatun Tash brought with her to Speaker's Corner 26 different Arabic Qurans. August 7th is now one of the worst days in Islam's history, as her maneuver brought the house down on modern Islam and began what we now call the avalanche of apostasy. By showing undeniably that the Quran had most certainly not been perfectly preserved, in its language no less, Hatun demonstrated that the Dawah guys had been knowingly lying about a central argument of their faith. Those millions that had converted in the West now began to cry out for an answer as to why the Dawah bros had been lying to them. Initially, Muslims tried to ignore the problem. But after about a year of that not working, they said that they were just the Qira'at. That's all it was. It's just different schools of speaking in Arabic. The Arabic itself, the original texts, are completely perfectly preserved, right down to the letter. It's just different ways of saying it. But here's the thing. There are only 10 Qira'at, and Hatun brought 26 different Arabic Qurans. So, even within the schools of Qira'at, there were still differences. So finally, after years of being hounded, they found a scholar by the name of Sheikh Yasir Qadi. They wanted him to go ahead and explain it all away. And now, he gave the single most famous interview in all of Islamic polemics.
Every single student of knowledge knows, who studies Ulum al-Quran, that the most difficult topics are Ahruf and Kira'at, and the concept of Ahruf and the reality of Ahruf, and the relationship of the Uthmanic Mus'haf with the Ahruf, and the preservation of the Ahruf. Is it 1? Is it 3? Is it 7? And the relationship of the Qira'at to the Ahruf. This is a topic that when you're the beginning student of knowledge, you're like, what is all of this going on here? When you go a little bit more, you learn to simply memorize what your teachers say and regurgitate it out, and you don't fully comprehend. When you do a deep dive is when things get very, very awkward and difficult. And this isn't new. This is from the time of the Sahaba. This is not a joke, brothers and sisters. The issue of Ahruf and Kira'at caused confusion to somebody whom the Prophet ﷺ said, if you want to listen to the Quran directly, listen to Ubay. Ubay is not some even average Sahabi. He is the Qari of the Quran. He is the master. He is who he is. And he goes, فَدَخَلَ فِي نَفْسِي شَكٍّ. What is all of this stuff? Again, this is you're asking us a very honest question. This is the first time I'm saying these things. Many people are aware who listen to my lectures that I've mentioned the crises that happened to me at Yale. This was the issue. That the issue of Ahruf and preservation and Qira'at and relationships between them, these are very, very difficult issues. And the most advanced of our scholars, they're not quite fully certain how to solve all of the unanswered questions in there. Here's the point. These issues should only be discussed amongst people who know what the Qira'at are and who understand some of these questions that are being
So
raised.
is what you're saying the shak that came, or not the shak, but the crisis that you had was in relation to this question of the relationship between the ahruf and the qira'at, basically?
No. The crisis I had wasn't that. The crisis I had was, well, yeah, wait, that was what generated. But what was the crisis? The crisis was very simple. Traditional understandings of Ahruf and Qira'at cannot answer some of these pressing questions that are now being poked by our people outside of, by our academics, not our, by their academics outside of the faith tradition. You see, in a Muslim environment, there's always some respect that we have for the Quran. We should. In a Muslim environment, we'll press a little bit and then we'll say, okay, khalas, sami'na wa ata'na. And that's great, alhamdulillah. When you go to academia, they don't have that red line. And they're going to just, the famous story of the emperor with no clothes. They're going to just point out, no, that doesn't make any sense. Well, that's not true, and this and that. And they'll bring issues, which I'm not going to mention explicitly, that you know are true because they're in your own books. They're not inventing anything new. They'll bring you riwayat and they'll bring you athar, and then you add to that very well-known issues of, I don't even want to be explicit. Then you bring on top of that makhtutat, and then. And it's very clear to you and to every single very advanced student and specialist that the standard narrative has holes in it. That's what I'm going to say. The standard narrative does not answer some very pressing questions. These are now well known within the Western Academy, that they're bringing forth issues. Their level of now knowledge is leaps and bounds above what it used to be, 100 years ago. What is happening in the last few years is not me anymore. It's the Western academics. These problems are now becoming mainstream. And by and large, our ulama in the Eastern world are not aware, by and large, of what's going on in the Western side of things. And they're not answering those questions in a manner that it needs to be answered.
We're very well aware of these holes in the narrative, yet kept pushing the narrative anyway. The Dawagandists came under intense fire for lying for so many years, and there were record numbers of apostates in the West. They had this information for years and even been putting it out there, but nobody had wanted to listen. Instead, they were blindly following the Dawah. However, now that they had something to question within Dawah, they started listening to the extra information that was being put out there. An example of this is that Muhammad's own scribe apostatized from Islam. When Muhammad would receive revelations, he would recite them to his scribe, Abdullah ibn Sar, to be written down. Occasionally, Muhammad would recite something that was kinda awkwardly phrased, so Sar would recommend some better ways of phrasing it. Muhammad agreed with him, and the scribe would write down what he thought was the better word order. The thought eventually occurred to him that Muhammad was supposedly receiving these revelations from Allah, and yet Muhammad still needed help to work out the phrasing. Abdullah knew that he himself was not a prophet, and yet he was correcting and modifying these revelations. And since he was not a prophet, but he was aiding in the revelations, then Muhammad could not be a prophet either. So Sar apostatized, and he fled from Muhammad, returning to the Christian faith that he had been converted from. Muhammad, however, tracked him down, and in an effort to spare his life, Abdullah became a Muslim again and once again scribed for Muhammad. So it seems like every which way we turn, we find issues with how the Quran was written and the claims about its history.